How do we get people excited about the idea of learning science before we've actually had a chance to explain the science to them? Now, I thought about this question a lot when I was a teaching assistant back in graduate school at the University of Chicago. So when I was a TA for a course, I wanted my students to be excited. I wanted to communicate to them why I love physics and why they should also love the subject. But on day one of a class, when you walk in, you know the title of the class and you've looked at the syllabus, but without actually understanding the contents in detail, it's sometimes challenging to see why you should be excited about it. So here's what I did. I had an experiment on the first day, the first discussion section or recitation that I held for my students in a class called Classical Mechanics 2. These students are coming in, sitting down, meeting me for the first time, and getting ready to spend a quarter learning about Lagrangians. Now, if that word sounds familiar, the word Lagrangian has also come up a couple of times in the recent public discussion around Eric Weinstein's supposed theory of geometric unity.
Where's the Lagrangian? Where's the interactions? Is the proton stable? Is there dark matter? Like, how does it fit into what I already know?
Those
And
were all
Eric's
different levels
theory,
of the stack, Sean.
Eric's paper has none of that.
And here is a snippet where I explained in my guest appearance on Professor Dave's channel why I don't believe Eric's theory actually has a Lagrangian in any real sense. So you can write this formula, but if pieces are not defined, I don't think this qualifies as a Lagrangian because no physicist can use this, can do calculations, can make predictions, because the pieces are just not there. But this video isn't going to teach you what a Lagrangian is. Again, pretend that you're one of my students coming in on the first day of a discussion section. And I really just want to communicate to you why this is exciting and why you should want to learn about Lagrangians. So what I did was tell the students, here is a 5-minute elevator pitch. Here's a commercial. Allow me to give you a 5-minute speech or soliloquy to try to persuade you that this subject is interesting and tell you why I care about it. Now, as an aside, this was extremely cringy. When I look back and read the words that I wrote at that time, I would not have the confidence to deliver a speech like this to students now because it's so corny. But anyway, I was a naive, optimistic young graduate student, so I hope you can forgive me for this level of just excessive nerdiness in this speech. But without further ado, let me repeat for you the speech that I gave my students on the first day of Classical Mechanics 2, and you can let me know if you would have found it persuasive. Once my grandmother asked me, in the most well-meaning way possible, what is physics? What is this thing that you do all day long? And what I told her was this: physics is storytelling. We take a mathematical structure, like some equation mx double dot equals minus kx, and we craft a narrative that interprets it. We say, this is a harmonic oscillator. You pull on it and let go, and it waves back and forth, and then we relate that story to our lived experience. Now, in previous courses, you've been telling these stories in something I would describe as prose, by which I mean you need to write down a lot of stuff. You write down vectors and components, you write down Newton's laws, you draw free body diagrams, you do stuff like that. The purpose of this class is to teach you a much more compact way of telling physical stories, which is more like poetry. I imagine you've already heard of the building blocks of this new poetic language, things like Lagrangians and Poisson brackets and things like that. But let me just briefly try to convince you that this new way of doing physics is unbelievably powerful and expressive. Now, at this point, I did a dramatic reveal, and I pulled up a hidden blackboard that had written an equation on it, and here was the equation. This single line contains all of the information that you learned in Physics 2. All of Maxwell's equations, light propagating at a foot per nanosecond, the Hall effect in a conductor, all of that and much more are all neatly packaged in this one elegant line. Then I pull up another hidden board. Einstein said that it was the happiest thought of his life, but general relativity has the reputation of being fearsomely complicated. Matter curves space-time, particles follow geodesics in this space, and this explains gravity, from falling apples to black holes to the shape of the universe. And here I've captured it all in a single line. And now I reveal the third and final hidden board. And this is what makes my heart sing. This is what sets my soul on fire. I first saw this thing 4 years ago, but it still gives me goosebumps. This is the Lagrangian for a supersymmetric relativistic string propagating in spacetime. Properly understood, this poem contains multitudes. It tells you there must be 10 spacetime dimensions, that there are not only strings, but also higher dimensional objects called branes, that a closed string can vibrate in a way described by something called a graviton, and that an open string can vibrate in a way which we call a photon, and so much more. This is the greatest story ever told, and as Yeats said, tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. Now, you will certainly be wondering, what does any of this have to do with this class? And here's a promise. Everything that we will learn can be directly linked to something that I think about every day. Classical mechanics isn't just about pulleys and inclined planes. It's my everyday language, my old friend, and my most powerful tool. We will discuss potentials and how to harness Stokes' theorem to make them work for you, which is exactly what theorists do when talking about gauge fields or string charge. We'll see how to analyze the Lagrangian to extract dynamics and conserved quantities, which is the first line of attack in any problem of theoretical physics. We will learn about the Hamiltonian formulation and Poisson brackets, which will lay bare the mathematical structure of classical theory for you. In words, it's just a dynamical system on a phase manifold with a symplectic form. We will learn tricks for central force motion, which I used literally last week when studying scattering from a black string using the ADS-CFT correspondence. And finally, we will talk about tops and rigid body motion, which give you intuition for the rotation group SO3 and even quantum mechanical spin, which is intuition that it's hard to get anywhere else. So I invite you to think of classical mechanics not as a dead subject about springs and spinning wheels. This is the first layer upon which all of physics is built. We'll talk about tops not just to understand tops, but to build a hook for you to hang your future knowledge on. You'll draw analogies between new topics and things that you learn in this class for years to come. So, you should be excited to take this class if you want to learn the nuts and bolts, things like rhythm, meter, stanza, consonants, and all of that, of the poetry that is physical law. With that said, carpe diem, and let's do some poetry. Now again, I'm cringing doing that entire speech again because it is so cheesy. But surprisingly, when I finished that very cringe 5-minute speech, I actually got a round of applause from the students. So I think in some sense it worked. They were excited, even though it was a little bit overacted and overblown, but I do think it is important to try to communicate at the onset why you should invest the energy and learn a physical subject, because you need some sort of glimmer of hope that you're going to get payoff, that something exciting is going to come later in order to motivate you to push through the weeks of problem sets and lectures and all of the work that goes into mastering a physical subject. So with all of that said, what do you guys think? If you were a student in that class, would you have been excited to learn more, or would you have cringed so hard that you got up and left never to come back? I'm curious if you think more instructors did things like this, if people might be more excited about physics, and if we tried to adapt some of this storytelling narrative, not just in the classroom, but in science communication, do you think we could do a better job? Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for listening.